Sunday evening, everybody. Welcome back to another video. And this is going to be all of the movies that I watched in May. I think I broke a record for the movies I watched in a single month this year. I watched a lot of movies. I counted 24 here. So we're going to be here a while. So I watch everything from new releases, 80s slashers, Apes, Mad Max, Terminator, you name it. So without further ado, because this is going to be a very long video, I say let's kick this puppy off. And the first movie I watched in May, I kind of forgot that I did watch this, National Security. And this was released in 2002, I believe. And it stars Martin Lawrence and Steve Zahn. It's just basically like a buddy cop movie. So, Martin Lawrence has always been getting in trouble with Steve Zahn, and Martin Lawrence kind of like manipulates him and puts him in jail for a hate crime. Well, they end up forming a bond. They stop a drug bust. But yeah, they just team up and clean up the city. This was a very solid buddy cop movie. It's no Lethal Weapon or Rush Hour, but I really did enjoy this one. So that was National Security. The first new release I saw in May, and I am very surprised that it was a flop. The Fall Guy. So this one was one of my most anticipated movies of the summer, and I did have a lot of fun with it. But it's an IP nobody is familiar with. But this stars Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt, and Aaron Taylor Johnson. This is basically a love letter to the stuntmen and stunt women in film. And it's a fun action thriller that turns into like a murder mystery, if you will. Because Ryan Gosling has to find Aaron Taylor Johnson and bring him back to his movie. But I really did enjoy this one. I got a full review of it on the channel. Check it out. The next one, Tarot. And that's totally not in the vein of The Fall Guy. I did not like this movie at all. But it was just one of those random horror slashers that deals with like tarot card readings. I don't know where this movie totally reminded me of Ouija and Truth or Dare, where it was just really dumb and you didn't give a crap about any of these characters, and the deaths were lame, and this movie was not scary at all. I'll give credit. I do like the creature designs of each tarot card. But this movie just really flew under the radar for me. But that was Tarot. Followed by my first 80s slasher, Intruder. And this was released in 1989. And this one was by far my favorite 80s slasher that I watched this month. I watched like 6 80s slashers. But this one was a slasher set in a grocery store. And this grocery store is about ready to close, but a dedicated employee doesn't like that. So he just snaps. There are some gory kills in here. And it was a very fun movie, but with a very twisted ending. If you haven't seen Intruder, go check it out on Tubi. You will definitely have a blast with it. And my favorite kill in here, and I think Fear Street Part 1 borrowed from it, it was the bandsaw kill, where he just like sliced this dude's head straight open. In Fear Street Part 1, it's a bread cutter scene, and it's even more gnarly. But Intruder, definitely a great underseen 80s slasher. So moving on, I have First Blood, 1982. And I did a book versus movie on this because I also read the book in May. And one of my all-time favorite action movies and series, I might add. I love Rambo. I mean, you see this dude on my end card after every video. That's how much I love this dude. But in this one, he is just a recently released Vietnam veteran who just goes home, but he runs into like this sheriff and his corrupt police officers. And the sheriff doesn't like him, so Rambo goes into the woods and plots his one-man war assault on the police force. Great movie, and the ending, totally different in the book, but this is your Hollywood ending where he just surrenders, and it's just a very heartbreaking ending. I mean, that monologue like literally almost brought me to tears. It's so good. And this might arguably be one of my favorite characters that Sylvester Stallone ever did. I do love Rocky, but Rambo is more badass. But Rocky is the better movie. So that was First Blood. Next, I have Final Exam, and I watched this on Shudder. This was released in, I believe, 1981. And this is a college campus slasher. All of these kids are in the middle of their final exams and getting ready for summer, but a random killer shows up on campus and starts taking them out one by one. At first, a fraternity does like a prank, and it goes very far. It's almost like a mass shooting. So the college students call 911, and 911 thinks it's a joke, but when student bodies show up, it's not a joke anymore. This one was okay, but the killer needed a little bit more work, in my opinion. you didn't even know who the killer was. It was just this random dude. I mean, even in the credits, it's listed as killer, played by such and such. But that was Final Exam. The next one was Mother's Day. This one was also released in 1981, I believe. And this has a producer of trauma films, but this wasn't really a trauma film. I mean, sure, it has like excessive gore and sexual content, but it's nowhere near like Romeo and Juliet or like the Toxic Avenger. No. This is about like three backwoods hicks that stalk these women and they abduct them and torture them. But the mother is the most sadistic out of her two sons. Well, the family does kill one of the women, but the other two fight back, and all of a sudden, this turns into like an essay revenge horror. So it definitely had aspects of I spit on your grave, but that comes in about like almost when the movie's over. Like probably about like an hour and 15 minutes. But this one was bizarre, to tell you the truth. But I did enjoy it. But that was Mother's Day. Next is my first Planet of the Apes movie. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And this one was obviously the newest release, and this is set 300 years after the events of War for the Planet of the Apes. So Caesar is dead, and a new subspecies of apes is featured in here, and our main ape in here is Noah, N-O-A. So, interesting character, but not as memorable as Caesar. But there is this tyrannical ape by the name of Proximus Caesar that controls Ocean Town or whatever. So, he's kind of like the main villain in here. But Noah befriends this woman who takes him to human weapons. So it's up to Proximus Caesar and the apes to get into this facility to have their hands on human weapons. I really did enjoy this movie, but I rewatched the reboot trilogy. It's nowhere near as good as the reboot trilogy. Which, speaking of that, right after Kingdom, I rewatched Rise of the Planet of the Apes. And this was released in 2011. And this movie really does a great job at setting up a very familiar franchise. Well, it goes into animal abuse and it leads into war against the humans. There we go. But James Franco just adopts Caesar and trains him to be human. But Caesar loses it one day and he's sent to like an ape shelter. Well, he takes ALZ 113 which is like an Alzheimer's drug that makes the apes smarter, but the humans more primitive. If that's not a scary concept, I don't know what is. But this is basically the start of Caesar's revolt and his rise to power. But I really did enjoy this movie quite a bit. It's been a long time since I watched these movies. And boy, am I glad I did, because I freaking loved every single one of them. I haven't went back to like the previous Planet of the Apes movies yet, but I did see the remake in theaters. Did not enjoy it whatsoever, but I've seen 5 out of 10 of these things. But that was Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Moving right along. This was a very random movie. The Terminator. Yeah, I had no intention on watching this, but we put it on Mother's Day for some reason. And you see that I have like a poster over there, so you can tell that I really do enjoy this movie quite a bit. But oh, that looks horrible. But this started off as a cyborg sent from the future to terminate Sarah Connor. Everybody knows this movie by now. It's parodied to death, and this also works as like a slasher. Everybody figures that this is a slasher because it's a silent killer that just stalks this woman. And I love this movie. The second one is much better though. But this is truly an action horror movie. So, great start to one of the best sci-fi franchises. Until Genesis. But that's really the only movie that I dislike in the Terminator franchise. I can enjoy all the other ones, but this one is a certified classic. But that was The Terminator, 1984. And of course it stars Arnie Schwarzenegger. I'll be back. Moving right along, and I'm not even halfway through this thing. Twister. Again, don't know why I watched this, because I wanted to do a dual review when Twisters comes out. But this might be like a repeat offender. But I'm just going to breeze through it. So this was released in 1996, and it stars Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton. You have Cary Elwes and even Philip Seymour Hoffman in here. And this is just about a group of storm chasers who chase tornadoes. One of my all-time favorite natural disaster movies from the 90s, and it is a certified classic. Again, when Twisters comes out, I will definitely do a dual review on both of these movies. So stay tuned for that. That won't be till July. But moving right along. I rewatched The Strangers to prepare for The Strangers Chapter 1. And This is a very creepy movie that has a very realistic uh, premise, because it's about a couple who are in their vacation home and they're stalked by three masked strangers. So it's your typical home invasion thriller, but a lot more creepier. The only thing that holds this movie back, though, the characters are stupid. I mean, there's like one decision after another that's even stupider. But I definitely go a lot more into it when I did my Strangers retrospective, so check out that video. So that was The Strangers. Followed by its sequel, Prey at Night. And in my opinion, this is better than the original. This has a lot more fun with its premise, and it feels more like a slasher. So the strangers are like stalking this RV park, and they torment this family, but the kids are more intelligent in this movie. They actually kill all the strangers in this movie. But this has a kick-ass soundtrack that just makes 80s pop even more cooler. I can't get that pool scene out of my head. It's probably one of the best parts of this movie, and it's a really cool setup. And Total Eclipse of the Heart is playing in the background, and it's just got like that neon setting. But the truck chase is pretty awesome too. Baghead is listening to I'm All Out of Love by Air Supply, and the truck catches on fire and he almost dies, but then he pulls out a piece of glass and he just falls. But I really did enjoy this movie quite a bit. Haven't seen it since theaters, but I am glad that I rewatched it. So that was The Strangers, Prey at Night. And, ooh boy, we got a terrible one next. Piranhaconda. Yeah. This was a sci-fi original movie in the 2000s, and this was, I believe I found it on Folsom Horror. They have some weird movies on there. Some of them I really don't want to repeat. But I just threw this on very randomly. It's a film crew that is in the middle of making this slasher in the jungle, and there is a piranha and anaconda hybrid on the loose. Terrible special effects and totally 2000s sci-fi cheese. But I will say this, Shandy Fennessy is in here. She's actually from Florissant, where I am from. Florissant, Missouri, I should say. And she was always in these like cheap sci-fi movies. And she was also the girl on Lingo with Chuck Woolery. Don't ask me why I remember that, because I just do. So, Shandy Fennessy is definitely a 2000s local icon. in Florissant, Missouri. There I go. So I just had to throw that out. But moving on, I have The Strangers, Chapter 1. And this was the start of a reboot trilogy that really didn't feel like a reboot at all. This movie, I don't want to say it didn't work out for me because I enjoyed some of it, but man, was it like the original Strangers. It was beat for beat the original. They just added a few more scenes. So this couple was even dumber in this one than the first one. And I was surprised that they both didn't get killed off. But what is very frustrating about this, to be continued. I'm like, so this ends where our final girl is in the hospital, and pretty much that's probably where Strangers Chapter 2 will pick up. This one was good, but not as good as the other two. But I do have more thoughts in my Strangers retrospective. But moving on, the next movie I watched was Death Spa. And this one was very weird. So this is a slasher that also acts as like a ghost story in a spa. Most of the time I had no idea what I was watching. So the owner of this spa recently lost his wife, and his wife is on a killing rampage in spirit form. This movie was very cheesy and extremely trashy. I mean, there's definitely a lot of nudity, of course, because that was the 80s, and all the deaths were pretty gnarly, but this movie was just kind of weird. But that was Death Spa. And I believe I also watched this on Shudder. So I definitely got my money's worth out of Shudder in May. But moving on, I have Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Yeah, quite a gap there. And holy crap. By far my favorite in the reboot trilogy. This is set 10 years after the events of Rise, and Caesar and his apes are living peacefully in the woods until humans come across it, and Koba just wants his revenge on what the humans did to him. And you have a great villain in here that is Koba. He's very ruthless and war driven. He started the events of war, and ultimately he assassinates Caesar, but Caesar gets his revenge and kills Koba. I also really like Jason Clarke in here, and even Kerry Russell as like two humans that are trying to just do work in the woods, but Caesar is like the only one that wants good humans to do their work. but Koba just doesn't like humans at all. But Koba stages an uprising and starts a war against humans. This movie's awesome, and man, I wish I watched it more. But that was Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I'm almost there. The next one I watched was If. And this stands for Imaginary Friends. And you might ask me how I go from slashers to Planet of the Apes to a family-friendly movie about imaginary friends. I'm just that diverse. But this is a family-friendly comedy that deals with like grief, remembrance, and loss. So this 12-year-old girl by the name of B just wants to be with her dad as he's going through like different types of surgeries, and she copes with like imaginary friends, and she runs a matchmaking business to reunite these imaginary friends with kids. So it's a good movie, but I don't see myself rewatching this. But I really did like Ryan Reynolds in here. But I really did like Ryan Reynolds and John Krasinski in here. They were kind of like the heartbeats of this movie. But this was just a pleasant surprise, and I really enjoyed it. So that was If. Next up, Slaughter High. Yet another 80s slasher. And this was also on Tubi, I believe. Yeah. So this was one that I wanted to get around to, and I finally did. And this movie was very cheesy. So it starts off with an April Fool's prank where the jocks gang up on a nerd and they, well, I don't want to say they brutally torture him in the shower, because that's not what happens to the kid here. But it starts off where one of the cheerleaders or whatever wants to try to get with him and have him lose his virginity to her. Well, that doesn't really happen because they spray him down in the shower, and very later on, he starts mixing chemicals in a chemistry lab, and he's like horrifically burned. And that's when the slasher element comes in here. So he dons like a jester's mask. And this one was very, very different. So he essentially just stalks these former classmates during a high school reunion, and it's just who comes out on top. This movie ended in like an acid trip. It turns out he was in a coma the entire time, and his classmates came back as zombies. I'm like, what just happened here? But I kind of enjoyed this movie, but it's nowhere near my favorite 80s slasher that I watched this month. Like I said, that was already Intruder. But moving on, I have Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. This was my most anticipated movie of the year, at least in my top three. But this is a prequel to Fury Road, which I'll get into later. So this stars Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa, and she is out for revenge against Dementus, played by Chris Hemsworth. Chris Hemsworth, in my opinion, was probably the best part of this movie. He was a great villain. So he just like murdered Furiosa's mom and most of her village, I guess. And this is just Furiosa getting revenge on Dementus. But she also meets Immortan Joe in here, and she kind of sides with him. But the villain comes out in Immortan Joe in Fury Road. So stay tuned when I talk with that. But I really did enjoy this movie. Again, this movie bombed hard. So we're not at a good start with May. But I really did enjoy it. So that was the last new release I saw. But moving on, I have War for the Planet of the Apes. Why don't I own this? I just never picked it up. This movie was depressing. So essentially, this colonel just goes into like Caesar's home and kills his family. And this is all up to Caesar to get his revenge. And it's basically your revenge plot and escape plot. So the Colonel McCulloch, played by Woody Harrelson, his men just abduct all of the apes and forces them into slave labor. This movie was very dark and, like I said, depressing for a Planet of the Apes movie. But the way Caesar just goes through hell to get revenge on the Colonel is just so fascinating, but very emotional. I mean, this has a very emotional ending, because all that stuff that Caesar went through was rough. But I really did enjoy this movie. It's not really a movie that could be rewatched as often, but man, I love it. That was War for the Planet of the Apes. We have 3 more to talk about. The next one was a movie called Scream. Not the Scream you're thinking of. This movie was much worse. But this was released in 1981, and I watched this on Tubi. So this was about like a rafting trip gone bad, and all these people started getting picked off one by one, and it's like some type of ghostly cowboy or something that takes them out, because they're like in a ghost town from like a western or something. I barely watched this movie. I couldn't get into it, so That was Scream 1981. The next movie was a much better movie, Madman, and this was on Shudder. I believe this was also released in 1981. And this was kind of like a, I want to say a rip-off, but kind of like a carbon copy of Friday the 13th. Because this takes place in a summer camp, but there is like this ghostly figure of a farmer who brutally murdered his family, and he's just out for revenge, and he just kills teenagers one by one. So that was Madman. And the final movie, Mad Max Fury Road. Yes, I did squeeze this in because, man, I wanted to rewatch this. This is one of the, if not best, modern action movies. But this came out in 2015, and it garnered so much praise. It was nominated for like 10 Oscars, including Best Picture and Director, and I'm sure this won a bunch of technical awards. This movie is perfect in every sense of the word. But this has Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron, and Tom Hardy as Max Raditansky, I think his name was. Yeah. But Furiosa is still with Immortan Joe, but Immortan Joe is now a tyrannical warlord. So essentially, his brides escape, and Max and Furiosa has to get them to like the Green Valley or whatever it's called, where all the water is clear and it's better living conditions. This movie just takes you on a high octane odyssey throughout the wasteland. Gotta give my props to Nux, played by Nick Holt. He was one of the war boys who really came out of his evil ways, and he like redeemed himself and helped them out to survive. Well, he was probably one of the most trailer bait icons in this film, because he just says, "What a day, what a lovely day," and it is so awesome. I mean, you could say that this is like a 2-hour car chase. It certainly is. This movie does not really slow down that much, but this movie just blew me away the few times that I've seen it. And I absolutely love this movie. Really need to watch it more and try and get into like the other 3 Mad Max movies. But that was Mad Max Fury Road. And there you have it. The 24 movies I watched in May. But I did start filming footage for my vlog coming up. And yeah. But that's all I have for this video. I have no idea what my next video is going to be. but I'm aiming for a book versus movie on Mystic River. But we also have the release of Bad Boys, Ride or Die, and The Watchers coming out on Friday. And I'm also on vacation this week, so I have other things to do besides work. So, definitely going to be a very productive week, YouTube wise and reading wise. But I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll see you guys in the next video, whenever that'll be. But adios, peace.